Coming up on Nebraska Stories, the pioneers of Nebraska winemaking, the unique history of volleyball in Nebraska. These hot dogs race for the finish line. A Nebraskan known as the most beautiful man in the world. And stopping horse thieves on the frontier.
We can't grow things that people are familiar with in terms of the varietals. I shouldn't say we can't grow them. We could, but it'd be very, very difficult, and we probably wouldn't be very successful. So we can't grow the vinifers like the Chardonnays, the Cabernets, and Merlots. We grow all French American hybrids, things that have been developed to grow in the Midwest, to grow in colder climates. In Nebraska, our signature grape is called Edelweiss. It's a Minnesota varietal. It started out as a table grape. I think Nebraska probably has more acres than anybody in the world of Edelweiss grapes. Primarily, the grapes that we grow here are Edelweiss, Lacrosse, Concord, Vignoles, St. Croix, St. Pepin. We also get Brianna that comes into us, Frontenac, St. Vincent. There's a number of grapes. If you look in a grape dictionary, there's like thousands and thousands of varieties. And what we're always trying to do is to find new varieties that may work here in Nebraska, may be the next greatest variety to make a great wine.
Nebraska is a relative newcomer in Midwestern wine production. James Arthur Vineyards has been there since that beginning and has grown to become the largest winery in the state.
Everything you see out here, the building, the landscaping, everything we've created was kind of a hobby to begin with that got a little out of control. About 24 years ago, my father-in-law, James Arthur Jeffers, had the property. And I went to him and I said, I had this professor in college that always talked about a small vineyard that he had owned. And I said, I'd like to grow some grapes. And he looked at me kind of funny and said, well, let's give it a shot.
He eventually owned his own meatpacking plant in Omaha and had the opportunity to sell it. So this was his retirement. He bought this land. He was going to do a pick-and-eat apple tree orchard. That was his original plan for this land. We put in the grapes about the same time.
We were actually the second winery to open in the state of Nebraska. The first one in Pierce, Nebraska, Cut Hills Vineyard, was just getting started. Missouri had a wine industry that was just starting to take off. They're starting to grow grapes and open wineries in Iowa. One day, Jim, my father-in-law, came to me and said, if they can do this in Pierce and Missouri and Iowa, why not here in Nebraska? So then we really started to put the wheels in motion, start going out and finding people as crazy as us that wanted to grow grapes. I think he's truly the pioneer of the wine industry in Nebraska. And we were very fortunate to be there at the beginning. We all want to create Nebraska wine. You go to some states and they may say, hey, we're a such and such winery, and then you find out that all their grapes come in from other parts of the world. Nebraska, we're not like that. We truly want to make a great Nebraska product, and I think that's what has helped us be so successful in this industry. And it's changing, it's evolving, it always will. There's a law in Nebraska that 75% of everything we produce has to be grown in Nebraska, and I like that. I like that law because that means that we're a Nebraska winery, and we strive to be 100%. My philosophy on winemaking is it's about 50% science and about 50% art. The science part is making sure all your numbers are right, making sure your pHs and your acids and everything's in balance so that you have a well-balanced wine. The art part is creating a wine that people are truly going to enjoy. the blending, the mixing, the matching, the making sure that that wine is the right color. And so that art part of it is very important. So if you blend those two together, I think you can make some great wine that way. We've got Sweet Charlotte named after our mom, 2 brothers. I've got Eden's Blush after our daughter, 2 brothers after my 2 sons. I've got five bottles of them. It gives me a good idea of how well our wines are gonna age. What I decided to do from the very beginning was create a wine library. And a lot of times folks come up to us and say, well, how's this gonna age? What's it gonna taste like? And I'm like, I have no idea. This is new for us. We're not sure what's gonna happen here in Nebraska, what things are gonna taste like down the road. Some of it for posterity, some of it for research to find out what's going on, and then some of it just for fun.
As more and more people discover locally made wines, winemakers like Jim see the industry continuously evolving.
Since we've opened the winery, and I'll give Nebraska Wines credit for this, I've seen a lot of people approach wine and try wine that maybe wouldn't have tried it before simply because it's made in Nebraska and they wanted to try and experience Nebraska wine, and it's opened up a whole new world for those people, I think. For so long it was so serious, I think it's becoming more of an everyday type of drink as well. And you're seeing a lot of younger people enjoying wine, trying wine, that when I was growing up, you didn't see that. You didn't talk about wine like that. So that's been exciting to see, and how the whole industry has kind of changed and is evolving. Kind of like Nebraska wine, like James Arthur Vineyards, like me as a winemaker, we always have to evolve.
I remember games where we set up the chairs in the Coliseum on the floor. There weren't even bleachers on the floor, and we set up chairs on one side that were team benches. On the other side was for the crowd to fill.
Coach Pettit, his genius was he started getting exposure for volleyball, and he did it by tagging football. As the football game was getting out, volleyball starting, here's the arrow, come into the Coliseum and watch.
He is one of the people that has really pushed volleyball, and he's pushed coaches and athletes.
Coach Pettit's the reason I was fortunate enough to get the Creighton job. When I got hired, he told Bruce Rasmussen, I will mentor her. He's been a sounding board for tactical stuff, emotional stuff. I've just been really fortunate to be here, and I thank Coach Pettit quite often, that he was willing to pass my name along.
Creighton is just a tremendous program. They've grown from really not very good to a top 15 team regularly. It's helped grow Nebraska too, because not everybody can grow up to be a Husker volleyball athlete.
A great crowd on hand here early, and we'll mix there, a little blue and red, and this is really going to become a nice in-state rivalry. Jazz Sweet, solo block close, and Jays fans ecstatic as they take set number 1. There's Michaela Frankie. Winters calls for it, puts it away. Tim Try. This now the largest crowd to ever see a volleyball match during the regular season.
That's something that I think Cook and Pettit really promoted. They wanted to have good volleyball in Nebraska.
Good hustle.
Last year we had 7 high school teams ranked in the top 100 at the end of the year from the state of Nebraska. The players that don't get to go to Nebraska or Creighton or UNO, they've got great options with Kearney, Wayne State. Last year there was 6 or 7 NEI schools ranked in the top 20 at one point.
And it's really important that we foster that, not only at the high school level, but at the club level, because we need great coaches that are great people that are going to continue to grow the sport in our state. These players in the state of Nebraska, these young women, are having a chance to play volleyball at a really competitive level.
Wow, what a swing by Lindsay Krause.
Physicality of the game, the speed of the game, their techniques are so much better. The game has developed itself to be much more complex, strategic. It's not just playing volleyball. There's intentionality with what's going on there.
Winters, tremendous vertical leaping ability.
The advantage that volleyball has is the net's lower than the men's net. So they get to be as athletic and as dynamic as the men do.
Maloney tries to get to it at the bench, and she does.
Kenzie Maloney's getting ESPN top 10 for making saves.
Ralphson off the block, off the face, and down.
And Katie Rawson's getting top 10 from hitting balls in the block off her head and going for kills. So it doesn't matter what position you play, you have a chance to do spectacular things.
The state believes in volleyball, and I think is a great place for female athletes to get involved and to grow and have goals and to get great training and be a part of something that's really pretty special.
We've gone corner to corner on this state, taking Nebraska volleyball and promoting the sport. I think volleyball is a state treasure here, and my job is to help protect that as much as possible.
For over 30 years, on a Saturday in July, the little town of Syracuse celebrates its German heritage. They'd hold their annual day-long festivities in October, but it's hard to compete with Husker football. Even when your event includes a ceremonial keg tapping.
Wow. There we go.
Other activities include folk dancing, Hammerschlagen,
We have a winner! We have a winner!
and a town parade. But among all the various things you can do at Germanfest, it may be that the most popular event involves man's best friend.
We say wiener dogs, but the German pronunciation would be Wiener. So it first started off with the Wiener dog races, and it's always been known as Wiener dogs.
People come from all over. They bring their dogs and race them. It's the cutest thing.
Loves to sit on her pillow in front of the fireplace. Jumps and rolls for treats. Marvin will kiss you to death. Boys love his baby pool.
People come from Iowa, Kansas, Missouri. I mean, right in the southeast Nebraska corner, come all over from these 4 states. The community for dachshunds in general is such a strong, close-knit community. I mean, they are like hardcore dachshund owners that are so involved, and they come today and they are just pumped to be here.
Benny loves belly rubs and herding goats who love green squeaky toys.
We have 5 lanes. We have a person that will hold the dog, and then when the announcer says go, the dog is supposed to run to the welcomer at the other end. And the first dog to cross the finish line wins that heat, and they'll run a couple, 3 heats, and then we'll have the finals and grand champion.
On your mark.
We have the senior long dogs, so the older dogs that want to race. And then we have the brats that are the middle-aged dogs. And then we have the little smoky, so the young pups. Those are our 3 categories. Dachshund, I think everyone is fears of, because even when I was calling back past contestants to see if they would come back this year, right away on the phone they said, well, Hank has won the past 2 years.
The German Fest Wiener Dog races are a near-perfect mix of fun and heart. The money collected from the small entry fee is donated to local animal shelters. And as it turns out, all that worry about reigning Wiener Dog champ Hank dominating this year's race was unnecessary. This year's top dog was Cooper.
Cooper would be your winner. Cooper is your winner of the senior division.
He's 11 years old, and he was number 11 in the race, and this is the 11th year for this Dachshund races. So it was kind of really a kind of an omen at the beginning that he had a real chance at something special. So.
Paul Swan was a dancer, an artist, a poet. He was what they referred to as a Renaissance man. He was America's Leonardo. He was always searching for beauty, and he did everything he could to try to find that.
Curator Russell Erpelding has spent the last 5 years searching for beauty as well, trying to find the paintings, sculptures, and other lost works created by a once famous and now obscure former Nebraskan.
He was meticulous about collecting and preserving his own accolades. He would collect these and would paste them in his own scrapbooks. His arrival in any city was big news at that time. He was a celebrity. He traveled all over. He was in Paris, he was in London, he was in Berlin, South America.
In this first major retrospective of Swan's work, the Museum of Nebraska Art hopes to shine a light on the life and work of this forgotten artist.
The interesting about Paul Swan was that he was famous at one time and then fell into obscurity. He was a great artist. He knew lots of famous artists as well. He was in the circles of art on a major level.
Paul Swan created sculptures of some of the most famous people of his day, like John F. Kennedy and Willa Cather. The Cather bust resides at the state capitol.
But Paul Swan did not see himself as an artist. He saw himself as a dancer. And the artwork was his ways of financing his passion for dance.
This worldly, refined artist came from humble beginnings. His family moved to a farm outside Crab Orchard in 1889 when Paul was just 6 years old.
His existence was to be working out on the farm with the other boys, and that was not his passion. That's where there was a lot of animosity between the children. Paul basically got away with doing what he wanted to do while the other children had to work. But he knew he was always different. He needed a bigger stage. And for Paul, the world was his stage.
From a young age and throughout his career, Paul Swan's good looks served him well.
In the early 1920s, Paul was dancing, and Isadora Duncan called him out. She was the one that referred to him as the most beautiful man in the world. She was a pioneer of modern dance, and that's what Paul was wanting to do as well.
He starred in an early silent film called Diana the Huntress, featuring his dancing. In the 1920s, he was cast in Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments.
He's one of the Egyptian guards. There was supposed to be this elaborate dance scene. There was a disagreement between Paul and Cecil B. DeMille, and Paul left the set and never returned.
In later years, the most beautiful man moniker may have been a burden.
He tried so hard to stay beautiful. At the end of his life, he was wearing considerable amounts of makeup to try to maintain the beauty, bathing in olive oil. If his stomach was sticking out a little too much, he would pencil it in, draw over the top of things. By the 1950s, most of his family had started to pass away. He started to experiment with a lot of different forms of artwork, delving into his own sexuality. He was not dancing as much, but people were still coming to see Paul dance. He was no longer the most beautiful man in the world. He had become more of this eccentric oddity. In 1961, when Paul was evicted from Carnegie Hall, he did go to live at the Van Dyke Hotel, which was where Andy Warhol was at the time. And that's how they met.
It's a great pleasure to introduce the most famous unknown person in New York.
Warhol made a film featuring the artist simply called Paul Swan.
Paul's had early signs of forgetfulness. When the films came out, he didn't even remember that he had filmed these. It's basically making fun of an old man past his prime, trying to dance and trying to please. He's even hollering out that you can cut that, but basically Andy did not do that.
This was the kind of work that I was doing at the time.
A few years later, in 1969, Swan's great-nephew visited the 86-year-old artist in New York.
I was always just curious to know who he was. I happened to be in New York City on a photo shoot job and went over to see Paul. So I came to the door of Paul's studio, and it was a large door, and I pushed it open slowly. I think it even creaked a little bit. Stepped inside and discovered that the door was covered with tapestries on the back, and artwork was hung salon style, floor to ceiling on all the walls. And it just felt like I'd stepped back in time 50 years. And I asked him if I could make a photograph of him, and he was very gracious. He didn't hesitate at all. As I got the camera set up, he just immediately started posing. There was no communication. And he picked up a fragment of a bust and gave me the profile and holding it up. I'm just going, whoa, this is the real deal. I mean, this is a guy who's been there and done it. I didn't have to say a word. He gave it all to me. And I just clicked the shutter, and that was it.
In 1972, Swan came back to Nebraska for the final time, escorted by his brother Reuben.
They had a small funeral for him in New York, and then he was cremated. Reuben drove those to Crab Orchard, placed them in a coffee can, and buried them between his mother and father in the small cemetery.
While Paul Swan is no longer the toast of the elite, his works live on in private collections and galleries around the world, including at the Museum of Nebraska Art in Kearney. With a larger-than-life reputation, this eccentric, prolific artist will also be remembered as an ordinary person.
His presence was not as shocking as I kind of anticipated it to be. I found him to be just a perfectly fine fellow, very cooperative, friendly, generous with his time. Went away thinking, gosh, he's pretty much a regular guy.
Kearney was a wild town in the late 1870s. Cattle drive cowboys hitting the bars first thing in the morning and riding up and down the streets shooting their guns into the air at night. Townsfolk had reason to be concerned, especially when it came to protecting their horses. In a time before everyone had cars and tractors, horses served both roles. So folks from Kearney's Center Township on the east side of town got together and formed.
It was officially called the Anti-Horse Thief Society.
Marty Anderson volunteers at the Buffalo County Historical Society. That's where she came across this story and the well-worn official journal of the Anti-Horse Thief Society.
A rather lengthy constitution sets dues at $1 a year for what was part posse, part insurance consortium. It also required members to chase down stolen horses.
If it took more than a day to search for this horse, then they were paid $2 a day for being away from home and doing this. If the horse could not be found, then the owner was paid. Some 3 neutral members of the society who were acquainted with the horse. Now, I don't know how often we get acquainted with horses, but they had to be acquainted with the horse or the mule, then could establish a value up to $150, and they would pay the owner then for the loss of his horse. I did notice in their bylaws that if a horse thief were captured, he was to be brought back and turned over to the authorities. So they were clarifying that officially they weren't lynching any horse thieves.
Officially. Actually, it appears there wasn't much action at all, although society members were paid expenses for pursuing a horse thief in 1882. Most of their time was spent holding meetings, setting dates for more meetings, making rules about meetings and dues, and debating things farmers still debate today, like which crops are more profitable. By 1885, they appeared to be all meetinged out, and the Anti-Horse Thief Society died a quiet death.
I think the danger of thievery was pretty much past, and so they stopped paying dues. They just didn't, they just kind of dried up.
Now, the Anti-Horse Thief Society is a small footnote of Nebraska history that's interesting to Anderson because of what it predated.
We thought we had a new idea with insurance companies. I don't think so.
Watch more Nebraska Stories on our website, Facebook, and YouTube. Nebraska Stories is funded in part by the Margaret and Martha Thomas Foundation.